In this tutorial, we'll be making this gorgeous acorn bag from leather. Let's get started by printing out the pattern. This front page is going to be your guide. It has all the pertinent information, all the materials that are required, the dimensions of the bag, and this overview to show you the layout of the pattern. Cut out your pattern pieces. Make sure you don't cut right along the line. Part of your pattern will need assembly like this one. For that, we're going to use clear tape, and we're going to trim off the excess from one side. Lay a piece of tape under the side with excess, and press the other piece that's right on the line directly next to it. Cover the seam with more clear tape, and you're good to go. Lay your pieces out on your leather and affix them with masking tape. I go over this process in more detail in my box pouch tutorial. Punch all your holes using the pattern as your guide. Use the 1.5mm punch for all of the stitching holes and the 3mm punch for all the rivet holes. Cut out your pieces following the exact line of the pattern. Take the pieces of the lid and dampen them with some water. This is to prepare them for stamping. You can use a regular leather stamp for this process, but I'm going to use this 3D printed one that a friend designed for me. It allows me to do all of the stamping at once instead of individually. Normally with a simple stamp, you would use a mallet and you would do your stamp one at a time to get the design. I'm going to use this 1-ton Arbor Press combined with my 3D printed stamp to do it all at once. Here I'm pressing my stamp in between two steel plates I got off of Amazon and then applying pressure for a solid amount of time, about 10 seconds, with my Arbor Press. If you follow me on Patreon, you'll have access to the STL for this 3D printed stamp so that you can print your own and use it for this pattern too. I have to scoot the stamp a little bit and press in two different places because it's so large in order to get an even spread of pressure. Thank you to Will from Sionnach Studios for making this for me. It's super nice. Stamp all the rest of your lid pieces and then set them aside to dry. We're going to need a strap for our bag. You can buy a pre-cut one like this. I recommend about 55 inches as your initial target. You can cut one out using basic tools like this awesome box cutter I got from my friends over at Punished Props. It's got a really nice blade, it's easy to handle, and I definitely recommend it. You can also use a tool like this called a strap cutter. It's got a handle, and then it's got this kind of arm section. It's got measurements along the bottom so you can adjust the width of your strap, and then in here is a tiny sharp blade. To use it, you take your leather and make sure you're starting with a good straight edge. Set the width of your blade using the arm, and then just push the leather through. The blade will help cut your strap and keep it nice and even the entire way through. I do find this works better with thicker leather, but it's an awesome tool. Next, we're going to prep the ends of our straps. Take the pattern piece that looks like this and lay it on the very end of the strap piece. Mark the shape of the tip as well as the placement of the holes. To do this, you can use an awl or a pen or a pencil or whatever works best for you. Cut out the tip shape using your preferred tool. You can also use a punch like this. It's designed specifically to get that classic belt tip shape. It comes in different sizes and different shapes, from more angled like this one to more rounded. Next, we're going to punch some holes in the ends of our straps. I'm going to use this hand punch because when I recorded this it was the morning and I didn't want to wake anybody up. These are a nice option if you need to be quiet because punching holes can sometimes be pretty loud. They are not super time efficient and can definitely make your hand more tired, but they're a good quick solution if you just need to punch a few things and don't need to be too loud. Now that our lid pieces are dry, it's time to apply some stain. I go over this process in more detail in my box pouch video, where I also show you how I use this specific gel antique stain that I prefer. You can do whatever colors you want. I like to use kind of a nice warm saddle tan for the bag body, and a dark brown for the lid. This is what makes it look like an actual acorn. The dyeing process is super simple. I shake it up, I apply it really thoroughly, wipe it off with a damp towel, and you end up with a really nice finish. Stain all of the pieces from your strap to the lid pieces, but not the harness yet. Once you're done, allow the pieces to dry completely. This is an optional step, but I'm going to show you how to line this bag with fabric. The theme for this bag happens to be bees, and I have a fabric that is absolutely perfect for that theme. You're going to lay out your fabric with the back side up. And arrange your pieces on the back. If you want to try to do pattern matching, make sure you lay them out in the order that they're assembled. I forgot to do this. It still looks really cute, but if you would like them to be pattern matched, make sure you set it up now because you won't be able to fix it later. Trace out your pieces with a pen or pencil. And then we'll be ready to figure out gluing the fabric to the leather. There's a few different types of glue that you can use for this. I tend to use barge cement really frequently. It's an awesome adhesive, but it can be a little difficult to apply to fabric. So something like this EcoFlow or this Fibing cement, which I'm going to use here, is water-based and works really well. We're going to apply our glue with these cheap foam brushes, and it's a really simple process. Take your glue and apply a reasonable amount to the fabric. You don't need to go crazy, and you can always build up more, but you can't take away extra. Use your foam brush to spread out the adhesive in a nice even layer, paying special attention to the edges. Do the same on the piece of leather. Firmly press the two pieces together while the adhesive is still wet. It doesn't have to be super wet, but it shouldn't be completely dry yet either. This is a little bit different than the process for barge cement. Do this for all the body and lid pieces. You can also line the strap if you'd like. I didn't because it's a lot of glue. We're going to leave these pieces to dry overnight under a heavy object. While those pieces are... Oh, hold on. Let me just... We're gonna need that. That doesn't need to be in there. Okay, so now that we have this is the pattern piece we used for our harness. We can use this to create our design for this harness piece. So we're gonna set the other piece aside for now, and we're gonna use this to draw our pattern. You're gonna see this about 6 times, so I'm not gonna show you the whole thing every single time, but just draw your design, come up with a cool pattern that you like, and then we can transfer it over to the other piece. To do that, we're just gonna transfer it by hand by looking at our design here. I'm also going to pull up reference of actual bees so that I can look at anatomy and shape and size and get that a little bit more accurate than it might have been in my sketch. This one looks pretty good. To sketch on the leather, I'm using this Caran d'Ache Conte crayon. You can't really see the name anymore because I've used it a lot, but it's sort of a chalky type fine art pencil. I find it works really well for drawing on damp leather, so we're going to dampen this up with the spray bottle just like we did with the lid. And then we're just going to start sketching just like we did on the piece of paper, but now we know where things are going to be. Get it? Things are going to be... Sorry. If you want to get a pencil like this one and use any of the other materials that I have in this video, I always put links in the description so that you can get access to anything that I use in the video. Not all of the tools are required. I try to make these patterns accessible if all you have are the most basic materials, but if you're interested in leatherworking, a lot of these tools are a great thing to add to your repertoire and build up a really nice little leatherworking shop for yourself, so definitely check that out. Before we start fully carving, we're going to take this tool. I don't actually know what it's called, but I'll figure it out in the description. But it has this bar that you can adjust and these 2 metal pieces. And basically you can set it to a width and then use it to draw a consistent border along the edge of your leather. Typically you would use this for stitching, but I like to use it as a design element on these bag harnesses. To do our carving, we're going to use this tool, which is called a swivel knife, and it is so named because the top swivels. This allows you to have a lot of motion and freedom of movement while you're drawing or carving. I've got a little ceramic blade on mine, which is super great to have. If you're just getting started though, you don't need one like this. Using a tool like a swivel knife is relatively straightforward, but it does take some physical practice to get accustomed to the correct angle, amount of pressure, and dampness of the leather that works best for your carving experience. I found that having the leather damp enough, but not wet, is the best experience for me. It's also going to depend on the angle of the blade that you have and the type of carving that you're doing. So I definitely recommend doing some practicing on scrap pieces to get adjusted to the blade that you have and figuring out what works best and what you like to do best for carving. Figuring out a new tool like this can be really intimidating, but it's really great to take the opportunity to go check out your local leatherworking store and ask the employees there for their opinions and professional help. They know a lot about this type of thing, and it's a great way to introduce yourself to new tools, new leather stores, and potentially new people who can help you in your leatherworking career. To stain the harness, I'm going to use these colors for no particular reason, just they happen to be the ones that I want. I am, though, going to show you how you're technically supposed to use gel antique, which is to layer it over a resist, which is what this water stain will be. I'll show you that in a minute. I'm applying my stain with just regular old paintbrushes. There's not a super fancy applicator that you need or anything, so don't worry about that. I'm using an old, I think this was a snack container as a palette. You can use a yogurt lid or whatever else works. I like this one because it has different chambers that I can use for different colors. Just have fun here and do some simple painting. It works pretty much the same as it would on paper, but it does bleed a little bit more than it might on normal paper that you're used to, so make sure you're not using too much stain. You'll get a feel for it pretty quickly. Don't worry that I'm not showing you the full specific design here. I really want you guys to take this opportunity to customize the bags and make them unique and your own. The harness is the one part that you can really get creative with. So use this as an example and a way to learn the techniques, and then apply them to a design that you make yourself. It's really, really fun. So now we have all of our colored stains applied, and we're gonna put the gel antique straight over the top of them. Don't worry, it's not gonna ruin it, I promise. We're gonna apply it exactly the same way as we did before. Slob it on generously, wipe it off with a damp towel, and you're good to go. See how our colors are still there? This is how gel antique is supposed to be used. It's like a weathering wash, but for leather. It's the next day, and our fabric glue is dry. So now we can cut these out and prep them for assembly. There's nothing special about this process, just take special care not to accidentally cut into your leather. Now this looks great, but you might notice there are holes here, but not on the other side. Easy fix, just take an awl or another sharp object and puncture holes. It really helps with stitching and applying rivets later. Before we can start stitching, there's a few pieces of hardware that we need to install. It's going to be a lot easier to install before stitching than it is after. To start with, we're going to take these two holes on our harness and install D-rings. Just slide it over in between the holes, fold it over, and then we're going to insert and hammer a rivet in place. The next piece of hardware is the latch for the pin clasp, which goes in these top two holes, like this. That's also going to get riveted into place. we're finally ready to stitch. That front page pattern layout that I told you about earlier is going to be really key for making sure we're putting all these pieces in the correct order. So make sure you have this on hand and follow it carefully. We're going to start with the front piece and the 2 pieces next to it. These pieces are assembled going down one side and up the other using a cross stitch. To measure out the thread, I find that about 11 times the length of one side gives us enough excess thread to easily tie a knot and pull things tight. It seems like a lot, but you're gonna need it. You're gonna thread a needle onto either side of this long piece of thread we just cut. You can see roughly how I thread my needles here, but if you want to see a more detailed process, I go through it more slowly in my box pouch tutorial. Remember, we're going to be stitching these up one side and down the other. Take your 2 needles, you're going to insert one into the first hole on one piece and one into the first hole on the other. I find it easier to start from the underside. Then you're going to cross your thread over and insert the needle into the other needle's hole so that you get a double overlap and they both end up back on the inside. I do this loop twice to get an extra secure loop on the first stitch. Now we're ready to start the actual cross stitch. Flip the piece over to the inside. You're going to start crossing the threads over from one hole to the other between the 2 pieces, creating small X's. These little X's are what help prevent the piece from creasing at each seam. It's really important for creating the rounded shape that we get for the final shape of the bag. On the front side of the bag, you're going to do the same thing you did for that first stitch and loop the needles back into each other's holes rather than creating an X. So on the inside, we'll have repeating X's, while on the outside, we'll have repeating straight stitches, kind of like a football. Make sure to pull each stitch really nice and tight. This helps the final shape a lot. It can be challenging to get this stitch started because the pieces tend to want to misalign, but just take your time, and the more stitches you add and the more you tighten them, the more aligned the pieces will stay. And that's it, that's a basic cross stitch. We're going to do this all the way up to the tip, and then I'll show you what to do next. Now we have these two pieces connected, and we're ready to do one more stitch before we can start stitching down the other side to connect the next piece. As I said before, we've stitched up this whole side. We're going to connect the tips here, and then we're going to stitch down the other side to connect this next piece. I actually mess this up when I start finally stitching. I connect it to the wrong side. What you can see when I flip here, I start preparing to connect it incorrectly. But that's okay, I fixed it, and you'll do it correctly because you're going to use that lovely guide I included for you. We're essentially going to mirror that first stitch we did where we did a double loop. We're going to do another cross stitch just like normal, but then we're going to loop it through a couple more times to make sure it's extra secure. In order to connect it to the next piece, we're basically going to do a saddle stitch. I go over a basic saddle stitch in my box pouch tutorial, so you can definitely go check that out if you aren't sure how that works. And right here is where you're going to see me loop it back through like we did on that first stitch, assuming I can get my camera to focus. There we go. You want to end up with one thread coming out from the front of the bag and also from the back side of the bag. This is preparing us for a saddle stitch as opposed to a cross stitch. We're going to take the outside needle and put it through the outside of the first hole of the other piece, and the inside needle will come out from the inside, and we'll end up with the threads reversed. Now we have this little loop that we can tighten to bring the tips of the pieces together. And all we have to do next is bring the outside thread back to the inside so that we can resume our cross-stitching process. Now we should be back in familiar territory, and we're going to do this stitch all the way down the other side to connect the pieces. When you're done, simply snip your threads and finish them off with a lighter like this. Keep repeating that process until you have your entire bag stitched. You should have a separate lid and body piece like this. Now we're ready to connect the lid to the body. I actually recommend that you do this after attaching the harness because it does make things a little bit easier, but I forgot my typical order of operations here. I'm just going to use some basic deerskin lace to connect the two, but you can use twine or ribbon or whatever thing you prefer. Just make sure it's nice and sturdy and secure and isn't going to tear after use. The fabric makes this a little bit difficult because the holes are smaller than what we punched in the leather, but you can use a tool like an awl, or later I use a pencil, which I find actually worked better, to push the material through the hole. You're going to lace your material through from the outside of both holes on the lid like this. Next, we're going to feed the lacing through the holes in the bag body, also from the outside just like we did with the lid, making sure to keep alignment with the lid holes. Once you have one strand through, tie a knot on the end to make sure it can't slide out of the hole. This will make it easier to adjust the length correctly and make sure you aren't trying to adjust it on both sides at once. Make sure this little strap is tight enough that the lid doesn't flop around when you open it, like this is too loose, but you also don't want it to be so tight that you can't open and close it correctly. You can see I test opening and closing the bag to make sure the length is correct. Once you're happy with the length, tie another knot right up against the side of the bag. Now we're ready to affix our harness. This is pretty straightforward. There's holes in the bag, there's holes in the harness. All you're gonna do is line them up with rivets. But this part can be a little bit scary if you haven't worked with leather much before. We're gonna have to smush our bag pretty intensely in order to hammer these rivets. This is where that tiny anvil really comes in handy, because you can actually slide it right into the inside of the bag. Now, we're gonna smoosh pretty hard in order to get this rivet flat against the surface of the tiny anvil. It looks like you're murdering your bag, but I promise you it'll pop right back into shape when we're done. You know how a football is super sturdy? This is kind of the same idea. We've basically made half a football and we're just gonna keep stuff in it. See? Pops right back into place. This is the benefit of using a heavier leather like this. Repeat the process for every hole in the harness until you've done all the rivets. back of the harness gets closed up with a basic saddle stitch. This can be a little bit tricky, but just take your time, keep threading the needle through the holes. You can do one at a time if you need to, and you'll get there at the end. Next, we need to attach the chain for a pin clasp somewhere on the bag. I usually attach it over on the side of the harness. Right around here. So to do that, I'm just going to take this hand punch, and we're just going to punch a hole. I don't include this in the pattern because people are left-handed, people are right-handed, and I wanted to have some freedom for you guys where you might want to put it yourselves. We can open up this fastener on the end of the chain with a couple of pliers and just press it through the hole. The final step is adding these swivel hooks to the strap. Just slide them on and rivet them in place. Attach the swivel hooks to the D-rings on the harness, and you've completed your acorn bag. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoy your new bags. Tag me on Instagram if you take photos because I'd love to see all your different designs.